Giovanni Belzoni was a man of great intrigue, from a strong man at a circus to an expert on acquiring Egyptian antiquities. The large man, standing at 6 feet 6 inches, paved the road to many archaeological discoveries. Throughout his expedition in Egypt, he was always winning over the locals with his charm and ability to negotiate, but also made many enemies. Born in Italy on November 5th, 1778 to a barber, he didn't travel from his hometown until he was 13. But upon returning had developed a constant desire to travel and explore. This curiosity took him to Rome when he was 16, for schooling in a variety of fields. In 1803, Belzoni started a theatrical pursuit as a strongman with a traveling circus, where he became known throughout Europe and gained the title of the Great Belzoni. He became a popular attraction with his act of reportedly holding 20 people in his arms and on his shoulders while waving flags in both arms. While at the circus, he met his wife, Sarah Belzoni, who was also able to learn a great deal of engineering and a bit about hydraulics, which helped him to utilize systems of pulleys and levers in Egypt. Learning these skills helped him in Egypt to transport monuments and statues. Eventually, he and his wife left the circus, started to travel, and eventually ended up in Egypt. There, he met with some officials and tried to sell a water wheel that would make farming much more efficient. Unfortunately, he arrived while there was an outbreak of plague all around Egypt, and he and Sarah were quarantined for an extended period of time. The water wheel project failed due to a number of bureaucratic and financial issues. While Belzoni was in the midst of financial difficulties, he met up with Henry Salt, who funded a small project for Belzoni to acquire some of Egypt's many antiquities. He headed off to Cairo to start and met a French antiquarian on the way, Drovetti, who all throughout Belzoni's career would cause many problems. Throughout his travels, Belzoni became very skilled with bartering, allowing him to acquire supplies and the workforce he needed in order to move the massive structures. The skills helped even more once Drovetti started sabotaging his work in many ways. One example is when Belzoni was trying to remove a sarcophagus lid. Drovetti had all of Belzoni's laborers arrested. One of his first large-scale projects was excavating at a temple in Abu Simbel. The laborers he had hired refused to put much effort into their work, forcing Belzoni to act to make them work harder. At one point they left for the day, and when they returned, Belzoni and the other European had excavated more than they had in the last week. He was unable to breach the temple due to financial constraints, preventing him from continuing, but he did expose 2 large statues. Once again, Drovetti's men had started to threaten Belzoni's work, and even his workers' lives. This didn't stop Belzoni from beginning excavations around the Temple of Mot. He found and transported 2 large black granite statues. He would have continued, but his work, once again, ran out of funds. While waiting for more funds from Henry Salt, he decided to look around the Valley of the Kings and happened to come across the tomb of Ai, a ruler from the 14th century BCE. He attributed this find mostly to luck, as he wasn't really looking around at the time. Once Salt came through with the funds, Belzoni traveled to Kara, a place with many burial chambers. He went and started acquiring a vast amount of antiquities. Many times he had to crawl on his stomach through a cave stacked nearly to the top with mummies, and his only time to rest was in an occasional pocket between the piles of bodies. Unfortunately, many times, based off of his writings, the mummies would collapse under his weight, filling the air with mummy dust, and forcing him to wait in the same spot for hours until it had settled. Once he completed his work in Kara, he then traveled back to Abu Simbel to remove and transport the large structures in front of the temple, one of which we now know as a statue of young Memnon. Using his knowledge of levers, ramps, and pulleys, he easily got the statue onto the boat and had them transported to England. Once he removed the statues, he returned to gain entrance into the temple itself. After many days of working, they were finally able to gain access into the temple by using an improvised battering ram. Inside, he found a large pillared hall with 8 large statues of Ramses II, along with murals depicting his conquering of the Hittites. He also took extensive notes, which many other antiquarians at the time failed to do. After he finished with the temple, he returned to the Valley of the Kings for yet another incredible discovery. At first he didn't find much more than a small burial chamber containing a few mummies, before he once again had to leave. When back, he and the laborers started digging and eventually found a tomb that was found out to be Seti I's tomb. Traveling through the tomb was hazardous as it was flooded in some places. This didn't stop Belzoni, who swam through much of it. He followed a path that was left by ancient looters, until he came upon a great hall that was the burial chamber. This chamber contained magnificent decorating, but most impressive were the alabaster sarcophagus and hieroglyphs all around the chamber. He spent a large amount of time in this tomb, recording and copying as much of the hieroglyphs down as he could. Belzoni also attempted to make molds of the statues using wax. He often returned to Seti's tomb to record more information. He had time to find 4 more burial chambers in the Valley of Kings before he left. When he arrived at Giza, he immediately went to Khafre's pyramid to find the entrance. But once again, he had to be secretive about it, due to Graveti and his men conspiring against him. He spent more than a month trying to dig up the entrance, and once they had gained access, all they could find was a red granite sarcophagus embedded into the floor. Once again, ancient looters had cleared the place out. Belzoni left Giza to meet up with Salt, only to find out he was getting paid practically nothing for his work, and all the discoveries he had made were being claimed by others. He was forced to make an arrangement with Salt that barely benefited him. With his spare time, he went back to Seti I's tomb for more recording and to make more wax reliefs of the statues. Once done with Seti's tomb, he went to gather a large black obelisk he had claimed earlier, but to his dismay, once again, Graveti had pulled some underhanded trick to keep it out of his hands. He took it anyways. But while transporting it to the boat, something broke, and everyone watched as it slid into the Nile. Everyone thought it was stuck there, but Belzoni worked tirelessly to move it back onto the shore, using all of the knowledge he had gathered in the circus and as an amateur engineer, and eventually got it onto the boat. After a confrontation with Graveti's men that almost led to Belzoni's death, he decided to retire from Egypt and transport all of his findings to England. There he held an extremely popular exhibition to show all that he had gathered. Salt kept almost all the money made off of Belzoni's work. He later died trying to find the source of the Niger River in West Africa.